Brand guidelines are only necessary for medium to large businesses. That is absolutely not true, and I'm going to talk you through why that is. Hello and welcome to Engage and Thrive, also known as EAT, your coffee catch-up with me, your host, Taelon, where we will go through common problems and hurdles that come up in business, marketing and advertising and try and demystify them. I know firsthand how complicated and confusing it can seem with all the different acronyms and all the things to do in business. So let me try and help you be better in business. First things first, let's start with grabbing a coffee. Well, if it isn't about branding, as I'm sure you're aware, I love a bit of branding chat and always try to be on brand whenever I can. Let's start by myth busting this. So brand guidelines, I think, get a bad rep on the basis that people think, okay, I don't have a large team or I don't have a large marketing team, and so therefore, why do I need brand guidelines? Let's set the record straight. Having brand guidelines, regardless of what size you are, and even if you're a solopreneur, an entrepreneur, a small business, or whatever it is, it keeps your branding consistent. And that's really important if you're trying to constantly have that message to your customers about who you are, what you're about, and for brand recognition. So wherever they're seeing your information, they're getting the same brand feeling, and we'll go through how you're going to create that. But if you think about it, the best examples, even being a small brand, think of the best examples that you can imagine. So think of the likes of Apple and Nike, etc. And think about everything that you touch and feel and interact with as part of their brand. You know it's Apple, you know it's Nike. From the packaging that they use to going on their website to apps or whatever it is, you know it's their brand. As always, let's go through vocab. So the first one obviously is brand guidelines. What are brand guidelines? And this is really detailing your brand's identity and how to present it. And people may refer to this as brand guidelines or a brand book. The next one is brand identity. So this is visual and verbal elements of your brand. Another one is style guide. So people interchangeably use style guide and brand guidelines, meaning the same thing, but they're actually different. A style guide is like a lighter version. So this is more around your visuals and your messaging. Your brand guidelines is more the meat, which is what we'll go into. The next one is TOV, which stands for tone of voice. So this really is, how does your brand sound? And it might be like a literal sound, but actually when you're writing the words, the copy, what does it sound like? Rebranding, so this is updating or evolving your brand guidelines. Target customer, as always, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but this is who is your specific audience that your brand or business is aiming to reach. And this is important as part of your brand guidelines and a lot of times missed. And the final one is DAM, which stands for Digital Asset Management. This is essentially tools and software that you could use to have all your stuff about your brand. So your icons, your logos, etc. Number one, why brand guidelines matter. So brand guidelines are important because this is setting the foundation and the tone for how your brand is represented and really how you protect your brand. So everything you wanted to be is in your brand guidelines. And the reason why I say about protecting your brand is because, especially if you're a small business, you may be working with other people to help you do your marketing or your website or some of your sales or whatever, and they need to know everything about your brand so they can replicate your brand and understand your brand, and someone else can pick it up and be like, oh, I get that, and oh, I understand what they're wanting me to produce and how it should look and feel. The other thing by having established brand guidelines means that you save so much time when you're trying to produce any collateral, and whether it is marketing collateral for emails or social media, your website, printing stuff, whatever it is, it saves so much time because you already have it set, like these are the fonts we use, this is the color palette, this is how we sound like. And so you don't have to do that last minute thing of trying to work out what you think looks good for your brand, because you've already established what looks good and what you want and how you want your brand to be represented. The other thing, which is obviously so important, is by having brand consistency across all your collateral and every touch point that your potential customer is going to interact with, is that consistency looks so professional. So that's what I'm going back to. Even if you are just a solopreneur, you know, a personal brand or a small business, can you imagine everything that you have has that brand consistency? That looks so professional and so easy for someone to recognize your brand. Number 2, what to include in brand guidelines. And I am going to say what to include in your brand book, because I feel like by using the word guidelines, that's when people think, oh my God, it needs to have rules and it's really restrictive and therefore we can't be creative. By saying it's a brand book, it's more about everything you're about. And this is where we're going to go into, because the first thing and the first kind of piece that you need to include in your brand book is actually a lot about your business. So let's call this your business overview. This would be your mission, your values, what your brand is about, who your target customer is, so the demographic you're aiming to reach by producing all your brand collateral, and the people that are going to buy your product or service. You might also include a brand manifesto, so this may be a bit more of an emotional piece about like, this is our aspirations, that's what we're going to do, and you may even have like words from your founder. Whatever it is, this part is really setting the scene about your brand. So like I said, if you're working then with freelancers or consultants or other agencies, the first piece they're going to read is everything about who you are, what you're about, and who you want to go after to buy your product or service. The other thing that you may also want to include is something that's called your elevator pitch or your key messages. So this is, how would you describe your brand or your product or service to someone if you were with them for 2 minutes? So again, really short statements, what you're about. The next part is your visuals, and this is essentially your visual identity. So this includes your logo, your color palettes. So your color palettes being like what colors you actually want to use for your brand. And they don't have to be the same colors that are in your logo. These can be different. These are colors that are representing your brand. Then you would include things like typography, which is your fonts. So what you want to use doesn't only have to be Arial or Times New Roman. And you may have different ones for if you're going to do headings, or if you're going to do body copy, or if you want to write things on social media. Do you handwrite certain stuff? So you have a handwriting font. And then also things like your icons, so icons that may represent your products or services, what photography you want to use, what style of video you want to do. Now, if you are a small business, this may seem like, oh my gosh, we don't know this information and this is a lot, and how do we decide this? What I would say is you potentially already know this. You know that feeling, like I said, your gut feeling about what you think looks good for your brand or how you want to be represented. The next one is your tone. So your tone, and obviously I touched on tone of voice. Now, tone of voice we could go into really in depth around picking pillars and this and that. For the purpose of this, as a light touch on your brand book, let's think about your tone being, what's your brand voice? So how does your brand sound like when you're writing about it? Is it more of a feminine voice? Is it more of a masculine voice? Is it gender neutral? Is it British English? Is it American English? Because then obviously some words are spelt differently. Do you like using emojis as part of your written word, replacing emojis for certain feelings and emotions? Do you not like emojis? Do you like having things in caps, not in caps? Do you use exclamation marks? There is so much that you can think about with how you write the tone, which again goes back to being really important to just jot it down, because then when you're creating content for social media, for emails, for your website, you want to read it and be like, yes, I'm hearing that same person, that same personality of the brand, even down to the point of once they've bought your product and service, what's that communication that you're sending them? How are you responding to WhatsApps? And is that person hearing the same voice from your brand? The other thing is, if your brand has a tagline, which potentially as a small business, you may not have a tagline, or there may be certain phrases that you say as a business, like, let's go. Put that in and why and when you would use it. And the final part in your brand book, that's probably the most important, is the execution of how you bring those together, your colors and your tone and everything. So this is the do's and don'ts. So again, if you're a small business and you've tried to do stuff on social media or on your website, on emails, and things that you think, oh no, that didn't look so good, or I wasn't so convinced by that, or I would never do that, that's when you put it in here. If you obviously are a medium-sized business, there's probably things that you may need legal to sign off, or you may have your CEO that needs to sign it off. So again, you would put these under, don't do this, or we would never say that, or this is how we would respond to messages, or this is how we would respond to a complaint or a negative review. Put all those in as the do's and don'ts. The other thing you want to give examples of is examples of how your social media content looks like. So put in a screenshot, maybe of one you've already created or one you're trying to create, with your colors, with your fonts, with your photography, whatever it is, of this is what we want social media posts to look like. And maybe you have a certain style that you want to create on your grids. Or if you're doing videos, this is the format you want to go for, when you're always going to be doing like camera lens down, opening things, and you never want to show people's faces. Again, put this into examples of how you execute your brand. And obviously, if you have a website or if you're doing any emails or anything, put in examples of those. How do the emails look like? What's in the header? What type of font to use? What kind of formatting? What's the length you might put in? And your website, so is there certain styling you want to use? Again, colors, design, there could be so much more. But as a small business, you may not even have a website yet. So you may want to leave this part and come back to it as the next iteration of your brand book. And finally, if you're doing anything physical, so posters, leaflets, pull-up banners, event stands, if you're handing away swag, so if you're giving people coffee cups or pens or whatever it is, if you have some photos, add those in examples. What do they look like? If you like them. If you didn't like them, put that in as a don't do this. You may also put on your printed collateral that everything that you do that's printed, you want to have a QR code on, or your website URL, because you want to make sure you can try and track that activity that you're doing offline. Number 3, how brand guidelines makes marketing easier. So obviously I've lightly touched on this on the misconceptions and about why brand guidelines matter, but essentially this just helps you scale your marketing efforts so much easier, so much faster. Because if you're thinking about it, you've set all this foundation work around colors, fonts, photography, styling, and potentially when you're doing your examples of how you do your brand, you may start creating templates like, okay, whenever we post stories, it's always going to look like this. And you have a template saved that, you know, when you go back, you're going to refer back to it. So again, now when you're creating content, you've already got a template style that you want to use. The other thing as well is, like I mentioned before, if you're working with any external partners, you've got this beautiful brand book, everything about your brand, how you want to be presented. You are protecting your brand as much as possible. The other thing is, if they're then creating anything for you and you come back with feedback, obviously a lot of marketing and design work is quite subjective. But if you have your brand book, you can also refer to your brand book to be like, no, we don't use that font, or no, those are the colors we want to stick to, or this is our primary color we want to use. And also by having all of this set, and you've obviously set the tone in the beginning with your vision and your mission, this should align everyone in a more seamless way around the business goals and drive everything towards that target customer, right? Because you're all aligned with what you look like, what you sound like, how you're presenting it. So no matter who in the business is then producing something, it should sound and feel the same. That brand consistency going through, which again, looks a lot more professional. There are obviously lots of tools that you can use as well to help you with creating your brand book and keeping consistent with your branding. So to start off with, I would say start writing yourself some notes about what you like and don't like, and what you think your brand looks like, and colors and etc. And you'll see it'll start evolving quite quickly into quite a big document. Then you might want to create it into a PowerPoint, just even if it's for yourself, right? Because then you have it documented somewhere. Canva also has a built-in brand kit. So if you then upload those colors you like and your logo and your fonts and whatever, then anything you create in Canva, as long as you have your brand kit enabled, it will automatically then have those colors to be consistent. So you don't have to keep finding that red color or that black color, because it's there and it's already, you can just click on it to select it. The other one is if you're using CapCut to edit any videos, CapCut have the ability to add a brand kit as well. So again, you can add in your colors, your fonts, your logos. If there's certain audios that you like or music that you've created or you've legally downloaded to use as licensed music, you can add all that as part of your brand kits. And if you're obviously using freelancers, consultants, or other third parties to help you with your collateral, any partners, the other thing you might want to think about is creating a brand fetch profile. Again, it's a free tool that you can use and it's online and anyone can actually access it. So you can claim your profile. So it also helps then if anyone wants to do any media or press around you, because they've got all your brand information there, your colors and your logo, so they can write something about you and use your styling. It's not a bad thing that people can see your brand kits. The worst case scenario is someone's going to copy your colors, like, okay, fine. The best thing is that people are going to write things about you, and it's going to be on brand and be consistent to what you like. And of course, there are other digital asset management tools that you can use, but a lot of them you have to pay for, and it may be more complex, or you may just not need it. So to start with, you may just want to put everything into a Google Drive and keep it on a Word document just written about you. As a wrap up, it's a great exercise to do regardless of what size business you are. If you're a solopreneur, if you're a small business, medium business, work through this and keep iterating, keep adding to it as you do more things. So as you do more social content, as you do any swag, as you do events, whatever it is. Also, you might get feedback from people to say, oh, I can't quite read that font, so you may need to change things. Keep it up to date. Don't just create it and then let it sit. You need to keep evolving it, because your brand will evolve, because your business is evolving. But the biggest thing to take away is brand guidelines are important for any size business. And like I said, even if you're a solopreneur, entrepreneur, whatever it is, doing a personal brand, create yourself some brand guidelines, a brand book. It's just a nicer touch calling it a brand book. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Engage and Thrive with your host Taelon, and see you next week.